Welcome to Great Bible Truths with Dr. David Petts. I'm his son, Jonathan Petts, and what you're about to hear is an encore episode from an old legacy podcast we used to do called the David and Jonathan Podcast. And it's all about how to make the most of your daily Bible reading. Originally recorded in 2018. Here it is now. Welcome once again to the David and Jonathan podcast, and over the past few podcasts we've been looking at how to get the best out of your daily Bible reading, and I hope you've been encouraged to get into the Bible every day, even if you hadn't before these podcasts, or if you have, I'm hoping that you'll be more and more inspired to hear from God through the Bible and to read it intelligently. So we've been looking at just some helpful background knowledge. We've looked at the books of the Bible, the history of the Bible, the message of the Bible, and in the last few we looked at the cultural background of the Bible. Sitting across the table from me, as always, is my father, David Petts. Hello, Dad.
Hello.
Hello there. So what we're going to look at today and what's going to help people with their daily Bible reading?
Well, we'll look at some practical aids to studying the Bible.
Okay, so what sort of different aids would you recommend?
Well, the first thing is the Bible itself.
Yes, okay.
Let's say a good translation.
A good translation? You mean there are bad ones?
Well, there are some that are less helpful than others.
That's nicely put. Okay, good.
Yes, I think this is the main thing I want to talk about today, though I will mention a few other things.
Okay.
People often ask the question, which is the best translation or which is the most literal translation? And because we believe in the inspiration of the original manuscripts of the Bible, people want to know, well, what gets the closest to that?
Yeah.
And I think my overall answer is going to be, well, any translation that you're comfortable with is going to be important.
Yeah.
For example, if I were to say read the old authorized version, most modern readers would say, well, I'm not comfortable with that because its language is outdated.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's not a good translation, but it's just not up to date in the way it expresses the English. Older people might say, well, I love it, and so on.
Yeah.
So it is very much a personal thing, but let me just give some general background to translations, because in the English language we are desperately privileged in having dozens and dozens of translations, and so many so that it could be confusing. Let me begin by repeating what I said a few minutes ago. We believe in the inspiration of the original manuscripts, by which I mean that if we take Luke's Gospel, for example, we believe that when Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke, and indeed the book of Acts later on, the Holy Spirit inspired him as he was writing. And we also know that he wrote in Greek. That's why we need translations, because most people in England don't understand Greek. So the first question that arises is, have we got the original manuscripts?
Oh.
And the answer to that is no.
Wow. I think that'll be a shock to some people.
Yes. What we have got is very reliable copies of copies of copies,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Because when you remember that the Bible was written over a period of 1500 years and so on, and some things were written on parchment and others on vellum and all this kind of stuff. I won't go into the details of that now, but these are perishable materials.
Yeah.
And even the Ten Commandments was written in stone. We've no evidence that actually we've still got those.
No.
So we haven't got the original manuscripts. Fortunately, because originally the Jews and later on Christians treated the scriptures so seriously as the Word of God that people were very, very careful making copies.
Yeah.
So there are many different fragments
Yeah.
of manuscripts. The good news is that we can historically have confidence that the Gospels, for example, have come down to us substantially as they were originally written.
Yeah.
So that's good, and we needn't shake our confidence or have our confidence shaken in the Bible that we hold in our hands as the Word of God. But what we do need to understand is that new sources, new manuscripts are being found from time to time.
Yeah.
And some of these are older than the manuscripts
We worked from.
that we work from, for example, that translators in 1611, when the Authorized Version was translated. So that's why most modern translations are based on the latest discoveries of text that we have, which are older. And so it's for example, in the New Testament, based on the Nestle-Aland text, rather than on the Textus Receptus, the received text, upon which the Authorized Version was based. So personally, I tend to discourage people from reading even the New King James, because it's not based on the best manuscripts in terms of translation.
Yeah.
So all that's a bit complicated.
Interesting, though.
Yeah, well, I think if we understand that, it's not just a question of which translation, but which manuscripts are we actually translating
From.
Yeah. But that brings us to the whole question of what is translation. And if you've studied languages at all, you will know, and actually if you haven't studied languages, you probably don't understand this very easily. But it's very difficult to have a literal translation of anything.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, and I didn't want to interrupt you, right at the beginning when you said a lot of people will ask you, what's the most literal translation?
Yeah.
I was going to say, is that even the right question?
Well, it isn't.
Right, okay. So now we get into that. So
yes, and if you got, and I mean you did Greek as part of your theology degree, and you know, if you look at an interlinear Greek New Testament, there you have the Greek text, and underneath it, word for word, the literal translation of it in the order in which it's written. And if you read that English in between, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
You've actually got to reorganize the order of the words, because Greek writes things in a different order from English very often.
Yeah.
And so on. And then, I mean, to take a different example, metaphors vary from one language to another.
Yeah.
Now, I'll give you an example from French. Nothing to do with the Bible now, but to do with translation. We have idioms in English. So if I said, rather disrespectfully of somebody, he's kicked the bucket, most English listeners would understand that means somebody has died.
Yeah.
I wouldn't normally say that to somebody who died, but I mean, you know, people do say, oh, he's kicked the bucket and so on. Now, if you translate it into French, the French would not understand what you are talking about, because it's a metaphor.
They would just take it literally.
Yeah, and what does that mean? Whereas, if you said in French, il a cassé sa pipe, he has broken his pipe, they would know immediately what you meant.
Is that what they mean?
It means he's kicked the bucket.
Right.
It's their version of he's kicked the bucket.
Broken his pipe.
He's broken his pipe.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So literal translations don't really help us.
No.
So then the question arises for every translator, well, how close do I want to be to the original text?
Yeah.
Do I want as literal an equivalence as I can?
Yeah.
Or do I want a dynamic equivalence?
Okay.
So my friend Professor Bill Williams, American scholar who worked on, Hebrew scholar, who worked on the Old Testament of both the New American Standard and the NIV, one of the scholars on that translation, He gave me the illustration in Hebrew that in Hebrew you might say the king's nose was hot.
Right.
Well, if you translated that, the king's nose was hot, the English reader would not know what the original intention was,
Okay.
whereas a Hebrew reader would understand that the king was angry.
Right. Okay.
So these are the kind of issues you have to confront. And so we have this rich variety of translations. And I would say New International Version is a very good balance
Right.
between getting it very close to the original meaning, but not so literal that it's hard to understand it. There's a little bit of interpreting going on
Yeah.
to help you to understand
Yeah.
what does this mean.
Yeah.
So basically that's one I would recommend. And I know people have their preferences and so on. Then if you jump to other so-called translations, which are not translations at all, go back to things like the Living Bible, or even now the Message and other similar
Yeah.
modern versions. These are so much I'm going to use the word translator, but the translator's personal interpretation of what the text means, that it ceases to be a translation. And you can't take too seriously what's being said here. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't read such things.
They're easier to read very often.
They're
aren't they?
easier to read. I question how useful they are in church, and certainly not for Bible teaching. But if you want to get a general sense of the overall meaning of a book,
Yeah.
like one of the Gospels or something, or one of the minor prophets, which harder to understand generally than the Gospels are, then maybe some of those freer translations are helpful. For a quick read through, get the feel of what this book is about.
Yeah.
I mean, even for an overall sense of Romans, fine.
Yeah.
But for detailed study of it, I would not recommend those kind of things. Stick with the ones that are closer to the original text. So, well, which translation, it is up to you, but there are some little thoughts and guidelines on it. And if you can get, and I've mentioned the NIV, there are so many versions of the NIV now coming out, like the Men's Study Bible and the Women's NIV Study Bible and so on. And I have already mentioned in these podcasts the Life Application Bible.
Yeah.
Some of those contain some of the things I'm now going to mention as helpful aids.
Okay.
So we're talking about aids to study the Bible. All I've done is talk about translation.
Which translation? Well, that'll aid you in understanding it, getting the right translation for you. So and now you're talking about study notes.
Yes. To be honest, I'm not terribly familiar with the great range of study notes that there are, because I tend not to use them. Why don't I use them? Well, I don't want to sound above myself when I say this, but I've been teaching the Bible for a very long time. I have knowledge of the original Greek for the New Testament and so on, and I'd sooner just get into it myself.
Yeah.
Having said that, I do daily readings and the comments with some of the YouVersion apps and the app and the
reading plans.
Reading plans, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, and I do those, and there's some inspirational stuff there which I find helpful.
Yeah.
But very little of that is actual detailed study of the text of the Bible.
So is there a distinction then between Bible study and reading what might be called devotional literature to help you?
Yeah, I think
in
there
your
is.
daily walk?
I think it's an important distinction to make. Some stuff I read today, it was sort of one verse, or it might have been a string of 3 different verses from different places. And then some helpful inspirational stuff for my daily living to encourage me to believe and have hope for today, that kind of thing. So that's good, and by all means do that, but it's not necessarily real Bible study. Let's look at this passage. What does it really mean? What is God saying to me through this passage? And I think the other danger is when you do that, you're relying on the author of the notes, and you're not studying the passage for itself. So it's a bit lazy, really. It's better than nothing, but I think
you've got to read it for yourself
and ask what God is saying to you through it. You know,
and let the notes guide you and help you through.
And I mean, some of these notes actually, there's a set called Jesus Calling, which are all in the first person, and it's as if Jesus is talking to you.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that can be quite inspirational, but hey, be careful. These aren't the words of Jesus. These are the words of the person who's written the series of notes. And okay, they may very well reflect what Jesus taught. And so in that sense they're good, but
they're not the Bible themselves.
They're not just be a bit careful with that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So some study notes of various kinds can be useful. By all means use those. But let's move away to sort of heavier stuff, if you like.
Okay.
Commentaries.
Right.
Now, I've got various commentaries in my study, but one of them is a one-volume commentary which I bought when I was at university, and we're going back 50 years now, and that was the old IVP, New Bible, IVF or whatever it was then, New Bible Commentary. It's a one-volume thing. I'm going to generally recommend you don't get a one-volume commentary of the whole Bible. Why? Because even if it's very fat, 4 inches thick or whatever, the amount of detail you can get on any individual passage is very, very limited. Okay, you will get some good background knowledge of where the book you're reading in the Bible is set in history and so on and so forth. That sort of stuff's useful, but the detailed comment verse by verse, of course, is very, very limited. So you're better, if you're going to buy commentaries, getting
buy them book by book.
Book by book, a commentary on Matthew, a commentary on Mark, a commentary on Luke, and so on, and the Tyndale series, as it's called in mine. They maybe have an updated title now, but there are various ones like that online. Try and make sure that they're written by Bible-believing Christians and not just by...
It's a good word of caution, because there are commentaries out there that will not inspire you
by
at all.
liberal scholars that just tear the Bible to pieces. So avoid those.
But Tyndale is a good place to start.
Well, yes, and so
is that the same as IVP, or is that separate? Because there's a whole series of IVP commentaries.
Well, they may be connected now. To be honest, I'm a bit out of touch with that.
Because you've just got them in your study already. So
that's right. And again, from going back decades, yes. So maybe it's time I updated. And of course, you can get stuff online as well.
Yeah. If you go on Bible Gateway, there are some free, or you can subscribe and get hold of a lot of what we're talking about.
That's helpful.
Online.
Something that will help you, and again, maybe this is available online, but because I've got a hard copy, a Bible dictionary. Now, I didn't say dictionary, though an English dictionary might be helpful for some people. I'm not being facetious there. You can come across...
There are some words, even I think, what does that actually mean?
And look it up. Yes.
Fair enough.
And incidentally, there are words that get misused as well, but don't let me go there.
Okay. Bible dictionaries, what are they like?
So a Bible dictionary, it will contain words that are in the Bible and have a little article on it. And that may include some place names, but it may also include some themes. So, for example, if you took the word grace, for example, there will almost certainly be an article on what the Bible teaches about grace and so on. So that's useful. Or, take a person's name, Nebuchadnezzar, or somebody. There'll be something about Nebuchadnezzar in there probably. So a Bible dictionary is quite useful. And again, you can find various versions of that. Different publishers do those. And then a concordance is the final thing I'm going to mention.
A concordance, what's that?
Well, a concordance is where the compiler has sought to list every reference to any given word in the Bible and tell you where it is. So, for example, if you wanted, say you've got a verse with the word heal in it, and you can't find where it is, you look up heal in this concordance and it will give you a list of all the references to heal.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful here, because which Bible translation is it based on?
Yeah.
Some of the old concordances are all based on the King James,
Yeah.
which is fair enough, and they're still quite useful. So you had the old Cruden's concordance based on the King James.
Right.
Then you've got things like an analytical concordance, either Young or Strong, ones of mature years that come to mind, and they are based on how often the Greek or Hebrew word is found. So you look up the word heal and you discover, in the Greek, for example, that there are perhaps 3 or 4 different words that are translated heal in the New Testament. And it would tell you, well, you have got therapeuo, that's one of them, and it will list all the uses of therapeuo there. And so on, and then other sozo can be, which means save, can also mean heal, and it would show you where that's translated heal, and so on. So that's a bit more sophisticated. However, I mean, it is a useful thing to have, and certainly if you are preparing messages as a preacher, a concordance is very, very valuable.
Yeah.
But you do have to be aware of the dangers of this. And I've mentioned the word heal, and I'll get on to one of my hobby horses here very quickly. Just because the word heal is mentioned doesn't necessarily mean that it's being used in the same way every time.
No.
So, for example, when it talks about Jesus healing a leper, okay, then that's a literal physical healing going on. So you look up the word heal and you find in 1 Peter 2:24, by his stripes we are healed. And you jump to the conclusion that this is a reference to physical healing. And a lot of teachers on healing make the mistake of thinking that that verse is to do with the healing of the body.
You mean it's not?
It is most certainly not. And if you read it in its context, you'll discover it's to do with the healing of the soul.
Yeah.
Now, some listeners will be annoyed by that statement, but I just challenge you to go away and read it and decide for yourself. And probably next time we'll be talking very much about how to interpret the Bible and see it in its context. So we do have to be a bit careful with concordances. And I did say this in an earlier podcast. Please remember that if you are studying a theme, and that means you are going to be looking at different passages in the Bible to put together your understanding of a theme like healing or love or hope or joy or whatever it might be, you do actually need to look at each passage and examine that in its context before you look at the overall theme.
Yeah.
So that's an important little caveat there. So we've mentioned a good translation, study notes, commentaries, a Bible dictionary and a concordance. And I think I'll finish today simply by saying that a good study Bible will contain some of those things anyway. So it may be, if you're short of cash and wondering what to buy a good study Bible for a start. You'll want to spend more money later on. This is your spiritual food. How much do you spend on food? Physical food, well, compare it with your spiritual food. So invest in a good study Bible and you will find that a lot of the things that we've been talking about are in some measure found in that Bible. So there we are.
Thank you. Well, we've had a fascinating look at how different manuscripts came to be and translations. We've had some helpful hints as to how to get more out of reading the Bible. And next time, as you said, we'll be looking at some principles of interpretation. Is that what you're calling it?
Yep.
Well, we look forward to speaking to you then. Thanks again, Dad.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to the David and Jonathan podcast. If you are enjoying these podcasts or benefiting from them, please do share them with other people who you think might benefit also. You can do this by just sharing the link that we often share through Facebook, or they can just search for David and Jonathan in iTunes podcasts or in any podcasting app. If you really want to share the love and make us more accessible to other people and more searchable, then if you give us a rating in iTunes or even an honest review, then it just makes it easier for other people to find us. The more ratings we get, that'd be really cool. Thank you so much once again for listening. If you want to give any feedback, please do so, or if you've got questions you want Dad to answer, please send them in. If you want to email any particular questions directly to my dad, you can just email info@davidpet.org, and we'll see if we can address those in future podcasts. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.